My name is Ivan. So I'll just make this very casual. I don't think we have much to teach. Is very much what we are doing. Also, I'll just give an update on what we have done. So let me just jump straight in. So my name is Ivan. I actually started the Serious Game Association back in 2012. In Singapore. That was only purely for Singapore. So we were having, we were thinking that we'll have some fun introducing games for education. And that didn't work out very well for us. The educators were the most conservative people we had to deal with. So after spending 2 years talking to the teachers and the Ministry of Education, we said, maybe we should just close the association down. But two doctors came to us and they said, why don't you start bringing games into healthcare? So that's when in 2014, we started to spend a lot of time into healthcare. The association that I started is a not-for-profit, so it is a volunteer kind of association. Over the years, we actually grew up to almost about 400, 500 members now. And interestingly, only 10% are developers. So we have very few game developers in our group, so to speak. Most of the people that we have, interestingly, are the teachers, clinicians. When we say clinicians, we are talking about doctors, nurses. Those are the people in our association. The military people, the soldiers, the civil defense people, people who deal with disaster recovery. So those are the people who are actually in our association. So these are what in our world we call them subject matter expert. So these are the members that we work with. But interestingly, we spend a lot of our time, because we are very short of resources, we focus a lot on healthcare. So today I'm going to just share about, what we do in the healthcare sector. So I work a lot with one of the, just to give a little bit of background, Singapore's healthcare system, because we are very small, we are really, really very small. So our Singapore healthcare system, the total population of Singapore is about 7 million people, but actually citizens-wise, we are only about 5 million. But Singapore, we divide our entire healthcare system into 3 clusters. So there are 3 main clusters, and they look into each part of Singapore's population. So we have the SingHealth group, we have the National Healthcare group, and then we have National University Healthcare System. Now, all of this are actually government hospitals. Singapore is actually a very government-run state. 90% of our healthcare is provided by the government. The hospitals are owned by the government. So basically, it is government-driven. So SingHealth, being the largest healthcare group, is the party that I'm working very closely with. The group within SingHealth that is even spending more time and a lot of their resources with us is actually from the simulation group. Okay, so in healthcare, if you want to learn about, if you want to learn hands-on experience in actually practicing in healthcare, you currently do it by doing simulation. Okay, when we say simulation, you're talking about mannequin, the physical mannequin, the dummies. So they cut the dummies, they play around with the dummies, they try to resuscitate the dummies. And also we do a lot of the work with cadavers. In Singapore, it's getting harder and harder to get cadavers. Cadavers are the people who are very kind to donate their body to science. It's very hard. Mind you, one cadaver in Singapore can last for 3 years. We have, by hook or by crook, tried to preserve them so that the doctors get to cut the body again and again. So there's no way we can go in that direction. So we have to start spending time looking at, can we use interactive media to start replacing a lot of these cadavers? Can we start using interactive media to replace a lot of the simulations that we are doing? So that's the reason why in healthcare, we are starting to look into the direction of serious games. Can games, AR, VR technology start bringing a lot of the realism that we need in healthcare training? So that was the direction that we are heading. So I work a lot with one of the department called SIMS. Don't think I need to explain what serious games is, right? I mean, to this audience, basically it's between entertainment and, simulation, and we are in the middle. We are the serious games where we actually play around a lot with technology like augmented reality, virtual reality, artificial intelligence, and robotics. So my own personal history, I actually started spinning off a company in AR back in the year 2004. That was a long time ago, 2004. We actually got an Oxford grad to write the first AR toolkit. Amazingly, company folded in 1 year, and now the AR toolkit is open source. how in the world I got into healthcare. I think I have too much time in my hands and I have maybe too little things to do. So I decided that I wanted to do something called the Health Innovation Technology Challenge. Okay. So serious game is actually my hobby. Okay. This is the hard part to explain to people. My real job, as in my own company, I'm an event company. I organize conferences. So I actually have a company that organize academic conferences. I deal with research papers for the last 16 years. So I organize conferences, anything biomedical, right up business conferences, but everything is academic. But because of my work, I got to know the computer science people, and that's how I started Serious Games. And they got me into doing this, and this started becoming a serious game hobby for me, and it's taking up a lot of my time. So then we started doing something called Health Innovation Technology Challenge. Now, this concept is very simple. I thought that this was quite easy to execute. I wanted to solve the day-to-day problem of the clinical or doctor side. I told everybody that I wanted the doctors to start forming teams. Okay, they form teams. They tell me their problem statement, and then I match them with technology solution providers. Simple. So the first critic came to me and said, "Now, Ivan, think about it. Which doctor has the time to entertain you? You know, they are busy doing their work. How in the world would they come and entertain you? And the nurses also, you know, the paramedics and so on and so forth." So I said, well, let me try. If I can get 1 or 5 of them to participate in this little experiment of mine, fantastic. So I went out. I went to one hospital. I said, can you give me some time? So they gave me lunchtime. Went there, gave a talk about this Health Innovation Technology Challenge. Back in fact, 2017 was the third year we did it. Started in 2016, 15, 16, 17. So back then, I just went there, give a talk for half an hour. Steal a little bit of time from the doctors and nurses when they are having lunch. Told them that why don't you form teams? Tell me their problem. Just need to tell me their problem, right? And then I played this nice little video for them. Okay, so you saw that video? Fun, right? And I own an event company, right? So easy for me to do this. Well, the sad news is that I run the event company with my wife. My wife said, if you touch any of our resources, you will never see me again. So I have to run that whole event on my own, alone, going to the hospital. And I said, well, for the prizes, let's come up with something. So I took out $1,000. I said, you know, 1,000 Sing dollars. I split it up into something like 500, 300, and $200. And I said, look, whoever wins it, get $500. So the money is not the driving factor. I mean, who in the world would do this for 3 months or 4 months and then get paid $500, right? Out of curiosity, how many do you think participated in this little experiment? I was hoping like 5 would be fantastic, right? I had 132 teams. I had 132 teams. On average, each team from the clinical side was 5 people. So, so that gave me a shock, and I still have to run it alone. I went around, gather all their problem statement, narrow it down, and find technology helpers to actually, the technology developer came in for free. They also participated in this because each technology came in and said, look, let's experiment with it. So the technology coming in was doing it for fun, right? And then the clinicians are spending 3 months of their time as a team also doing it for fun, because honestly, nobody will do this for $500, even if you win first prize, all right? So these are some of the solutions that came out of it. Okay, so the first one in 2016 is a very interesting solution. They call it the fun knee. Yeah, the pun is funny, right? So anyway, I kind of like the idea. Now, when you get older, your knee gets a little bit rubbed off, and then you actually have something to do. You have to actually replace your knee. So we have the total knee replacement operation for the older people. Now, this is a normal operation. You go in one day kind of stuff, and then after that you get out. But the whole idea is that you need to exercise your knee back in order to recover. The more you do your exercises with your knee, you recover faster. Okay? But there's one fundamental problem. When you're lying in the bed in the hospital and the therapist will come in and help you do the exercises, if the therapist is not there, you will never do it. Okay? So every time we see the patient is just lying there until the therapist comes in once a day, and then they'll start exercising. So what's the solution for this? A $2 knee brace. Okay? We got a $2 knee brace, and inside the knee brace, we put in sensors. Okay? So you have a knee brace with a sensor, and the sensor costs, I think, 30 cents or 40 cents or something like that. So the engineers came in, and then they started doing this knee brace. Then what else do? We create the game. Okay, so the usual way of playing this game is quite interesting. It's a fishing game. So it's on the phone, right? So in order to fish, you actually throw out the fishing line with the phone this way. You throw it out, and then once you catch the fish, you roll it back in. Okay, very simple. So what did they do? But this has got to do with the knee and not your hand, right? So the sensors are linked to the game on the phone, and in order to pull the fish back, you have to pull your knee, right? So the patient was actually, that was the actual patient that we tested on. So the patient was actually practicing trying to catch, and each time they got so excited, and the fish gets bigger and bigger, and then it got more excited, and then the more they pull. And we realized that they were doing 4 or 5 times of this exercise, which is already 5 times more than what they were doing usually, without the therapist. And with the sensors in there, basically, you see, we make it more interesting. We make the fishes bigger and bigger. We have different stages, and we were capturing the data. We were able to capture the data of each of the patient, how many times they were doing it, how often they were doing it, and the time lapse they were doing it. So this was done in 2016, and it was kind of fun for us. This gave us quite a bit of the data. The therapist would actually be able to make use of the data without having to be there. So this was good. We did that, and now I think they are already practicing it in the hospitals in Singapore. 2017, this was another interesting project that we took on, Under the Sea. So the problem is quite simple. If, I don't know, if you have kids and the kids have to go for operation, the operating room is one of the coldest rooms in the hospital. Okay, and if you are a young little boy or a young little girl, and then somebody says take off your clothes, and the temperature is always 24, 23, or even much lower, you're cold, and you're supposed to put on the robe before the operation, and so the kids are always very nervous. That is one of the problems that we face in the hospital. The kids are always very nervous, and they struggle and they cry, and all the doctors know that if you are in that condition, even if I put anesthesia, you go into sleep, your whole body is tense. There are more complications that comes out of this kind of situation. So for us, it is always good to have the patient going into operation calm, and relax. So how do we do that? because kids are different. And if I show you some of the videos, it's really shocking, but I can't show you that because of the patient issue. You can see them struggling, and we even have to bring in the parents, and the parents have to calm the kids down, and then they have to keep talking to them, and that delay the entire operation because a lot of time is spent not on the table but more on the process. So the anesthesia, the doctor himself came to us and said, now I need to calm them down. Can we use VR solution? Okay, so he decided that he wanted to do a Nemo game. Doing the Nemo game is the easy part. The hard part was the hardware. So this is something that they came up with. Very, very interesting. Number one, everybody knows VR, but have you seen a VR goggle that actually fits a kid's face? You need a smaller VR goggle because kids are smaller, right? But not only that, you have kids who are smaller, then you have to trick them into, I use the word trick, yes, trick them into that they are really playing the game. When the gas are administered, which is the anesthesia that is administered to them, is in a form of gas. So what do? We turn the VR into a snorkeling VR. Okay, so you have a mask, and then you have a pipe that comes out, and then you have that. Okay, and then they get to see this. So they're under the sea, and then if your sound effect is there, they are like a little turtle going around collecting points. So each time they come here for the pre-op preparation, we already let them start playing the game. So they get used to it, and they're playing the game, and they're enjoying it, and their levels to achieve. On the day of the operation, when they are actually there, we let them go through the same procedure. Initial test, 5 kids, all 5 of them were super calm. Okay, they played the game, and they continue playing, and when we administered the anesthesia to them, they were very calm, and they were just rolled into operation, and they came out. So this is something that the doctors were very, very happy that the effect was there, right? So we actually went to the extent of testing that out. So those were just two out of a lot of the projects that we were actually playing around with. For us, it does work. We believe games work, because there's the motivation factor. The most important part for us was actually the data collection factor. This is something that we learned by chance over the years, because in each of the game, there were a lot of data. And we are not talking about the superficial data. Now, a lot of the game companies in the entertainment world are already collecting data. They're collecting data so that they can sell you more power, more money, more clothes to buy or sword to fight inside the game. Now, turn that to something else. We are already collecting 3,500 data points in a single gameplay for any of the games that we are training. Later, I'll show it to you. And the nurses and doctors were playing games, and each time they play, they are playing about 5 to 6 times the game. So each gameplay, you get 3,500 points, so you get a lot of data point. And each time we roll out a trial, we are using it on 2,000 over nurses. So the amount of data that we have is actually very rich. So in that sense, game is actually very effective, and the doctors are all buying into this at this moment. So we basically divide our games into clinical, skill-based games, and cognitive. But because we are still at the very early stages, a lot of our work is actually still focused on skill-based training game. So we are now spending a lot of our time looking at how do we look at procedural kind of games. So later I'll show you some of the examples that we are actually developing right now, and the kind of decision making that we incorporate into the game. And we are already starting to explore a lot on virtual standard patient, using machine learning, using AI to actually drive the avatars. We are already putting in adaptive algorithm so that our games can actually speed up or actually slow down depending on the learner. So we are already starting to look into personalized learning for a lot of the games that we are developing as a standard item. We are also looking at dashboards that is actually showing breakdown of all the analytics of every stage of the game. So I'll share this in a short while. So when we first started the journey, we thought that the ecosystem is just the technology developer and the subject matter expert. Even with that, the world was a mess. Okay, I'm going to say this, hate me if you want. Developers Even the word technology developer encompasses so many different skill sets. Okay, you have your graphic artists, you have programmers, and then you also have your data scientists, and so on and so forth. And that everybody have to come together. You live in a world that is quite different from the subject matter expert. So in this case, if it's healthcare, you live very different from the healthcare world. You have a structure, maybe for the designer a little bit less of that structure, but you still have a structure. You need to know, certain parameters you work in. Then the subject matter expert being in the healthcare, they live in a totally different world. They have no idea what you're talking about when you say coding. Okay, they have no idea that they just think that if I want this, you just produce that. Okay, I still have doctors who comes to me and say Star Wars is a real thing. People can teleport from one place, and I said, you gotta be kidding me. Certain things, you really have to. Some of the doctors are really out there. We realize one thing: whatever we are developing, when the test that we always put ourselves through is that when you develop a game, can you sell it? That was what we were testing ourselves on. Okay, when you develop a game, can you sell the game? So we started taking some of the games that we were producing in our hospital, and we started going to other hospitals and trying to sell it. Being ambitious, I didn't even want to sell the games in Singapore. I started going to Malaysia. I went to Taiwan, and I was telling the hospitals in Taiwan and Malaysia, please buy our game. It's good. It has the dashboard and so on and so forth. We learn a lot from this because the hospitals look at our face and say, you got to be kidding me. What is the basic problem? Very simple. Hospitals are not IT companies. You come to me with one game. You come to me with one game. That, gentlemen come to me with another game, 3 games. Do you expect the hospital to actually try to make all your game work on a single platform? Because you're collecting data, but theoretically, I have one single platform that you need to work on, and I'm not going to integrate all your platform. If I'm not going to integrate your platform, all your different game, you design it that way, you use Unity, you use Unreal, and then, the worst thing is I come in and I say, can you link it to my learning management system? That is a whole new world. And then after that, we got cybersecurity issue, right? This one I can even share with you. Singapore lost 1.8 million of our patient data. No secret. Our Prime Minister's data got stolen too, right? Interestingly, our EMR is all centralized. You look at Singapore, it's good that it's small, but all our hospitals are all centralized. You can go to any hospital, go to another location, you can still find your medical record in the EMR. But disadvantage is that when we want to link our games inside the EMR together with the EMR records, it's almost impossible because there is a lot of security breach because you need to launch the game in exe file. So there is a lot of complications in that. But yet, other hospitals are not willing to buy your game if 1, you want me to integrate them. 2, show me how I can measure the KPI. As a hospital, I can only pay if you can show me effectiveness. Why would I pay for something that you just tell me it is fun and is engaging? Measure engagement for me. Even if you can measure engagement for me, so what? I'm a hospital. I will have to work on very practical terms. Those were something that we couldn't work with, and that came out with another dimension to the entire game. You need an outcome designer. In some cases, people call it the instructional designer, assessment designer. There must be an outcome that is measurable, quantifiable. So for a lot of the games that we are developing, we have to start looking at it and say, what is it that you can measure, how much man hours you can save, and what is the value the hospitals are getting? So the management of the hospital and the doctors are 2 different groups of people. The people who decide whether they want to buy your game product are the management, not the doctors. The doctors can say all they want about, it's a fantastic stuff. But the management will have to finally decide, how do I integrate the entire thing together, and where is it that I can save money? Then we have to get these 3 groups of people talking to each other. And you would think the subject matter experts and the outcome designers should be the same group of people. Wrong. So they again have their own set of criteria for measuring, outcomes. So, and even that I have to struggle with, because the subject matter expert means that I know my subject. I can tell you what happens in the entire medical procedure. But when it comes to assessment, they may not be the correct people. So Sometimes they can play dual role, but sometimes it is two different groups of people. So you have to get these three groups of people to talk to each other, and sometimes it becomes mini war that happens when we have our meeting. So it's really, really it's a big struggle. All right. Now I bring you to the bigger picture. Okay. Now you have your outcome designers, you have your subject matter experts, and then now you start throwing in your hospital people, and then you start throwing your regulators. Okay, your regulators will be the people from the government. Okay, because you are trying to sell me a game that teach me medical procedures. You better get it right, because if you are teaching the wrong thing, you are teaching a whole generation of nurses and doctors who are doing the wrong thing, and that translate directly to patient care, and that is dangerous. Okay, so the regulators will start coming in. The business owner, interestingly, I will tell you, in Singapore, we have managed to reach a point where the hospitals, the public hospitals, the government hospitals are starting to realize that there's nothing wrong with them being the game owners. Years ago, 2 or 3 years ago, I will tell you this is almost impossible. The hospitals will say, no, we are not. We are healthcare providers. But today, they are now coming to me and say, look, Ivan, we are willing to invest money into this. We, as a hospital, are willing to invest money into this, create the game, save us the money that you said you can save us for manpower training. And then after that, export the game out to different countries for me so that I can earn the revenue to sustain and maintain the games, because the games cannot maintain by itself, because the developers have no resources to maintain the games by themselves. Okay, so the business owners are starting to start to morph, and they are not your venture capitalists, they are actually the hospitals themselves. So this is the ecosystem that we are trying to build up. If we look at it from the marketing point of view, so if you look at it from product, price, distribution, and promotion, you start to have all the different stakeholders getting involved in all the four factors that you're looking at. So I'll go through quickly one by one. Traditionally, games are always defined with a challenge, a set of rules, and a goals. Now, more than ever, it's getting more and more important that there must be a quantifiable outcome. Okay, we didn't want to go down the road of learning outcomes. Let me explain that. I've been challenged so many times, and that is the problem that we face in Singapore, is that when you start talking about prove to me that somebody is learning in the game, that is tough. There are many different frameworks, there are many different models, and if you can prove one, somebody else will prove that it's not right. Okay? And there are so many assumptions and so many, parameters, or say, if the condition is like this, we can then prove this. Now, proving learning is terrible, okay? And it has so many challenges to it. So instead of proving learning, can we not prove assessment, right? If you use the game not for learning, but actually for assessment, then it is much easier to prove, okay? Why do I say assessment? So the game that we developed is called the blood transfusion game for Singapore General Hospital. Every year, we have 9,000 nurses having to go through the basic test on blood transfusion. Okay? Very simple. In Singapore, we have about 28,000 nurses in all our hospital system. And by rotation, every year, 9,000 of this 28,000 have to go through this kind of CME course. So in the end, they get licensed to continue practicing as a nurse. All right. So they have to know the procedure and the steps to go through. Currently, how we are doing it is that a senior nurse, okay, will go to a junior nurse and say, when your time of assessment comes out, I will have a checklist, and I'll go to you, and we have to look for somebody who is going through the process of blood transfusion, which means that, in some cases, yes, you get a lot of people doing blood transfusion. Then the junior nurse will actually go through the process, and the senior nurse will actually start taking on the checklist. Standard. I think it is also practiced very much here. In Malaysia, I know it's the same. In Indonesia, it's the same. So they have a checklist. However, if you're talking about 9,000 nurses, how many senior nurses do you have? Okay, think about it, right? So for the senior nurses, they have other roles that they have to play. So sometimes when time is very short, your checklist becomes shorter. So you look at certain things and you're not important, you just say, yeah, that's fine, we will skip that, because then if there is nobody requiring blood transfusion on that day, you know what happens? It depends on how well you know the senior nurse or the junior nurse. If their relationship is, we go back 9 years, 10 years, I think you should be able to do this, and you're fine, I'll just sign off. That is dangerous. Okay, that is something that I hate to say, but it happens. All right, sometimes we do that because we are trying to be efficient. We are trying to say, look, you don't need to go through the process, go through blood transfusion. We trust you, you can do it. So they sign off. Now imagine there are other procedures and that happens. All right, so there's a lot of human error when it comes to this kind of procedures. Now, how do we use games to do this? So this is what we developed. We started to break the game into parts, just like the way we would test somebody. So in this case, you look at the first part, is actually documentation. It's important for us to actually check what are the various documentation, whether they check it is the right patient with the right blood group, whether the patient actually signed off. And then this is the second part, which is packing of the blood box, requesting for the blood type from the blood bank. So they need to get this right. And then when the blood box comes back, then they need to actually go through the procedure of insertion. So in Singapore, we have double checking. So you need to check with the patient that he's of the right person, with the right ID. And then you have to check with him verbally whether his name and his IC is correct. So you reconfirm all the facts. So the entire process looks very much like a simulation. However, this is open. In other words, if you realize there are a lot of equipment inside the room, they can choose to do anything. There's no hint. We don't hint to them. So if I were to put a broom there, and if somebody takes up the broom and sweep the floor, you can continue with the game. All right? There's nothing wrong with that. The only thing is that you don't score the right points. Now, this is the data behind it. We were tracking every single data over time, and also how much time they've been using for each of the stages. Yeah, then we have to link the game to their learning management system. Right. So, as you can see, the interesting thing is that we actually built the blood transfusion game to be applied in the hospital. And the very first trial when we did this, we already tried with 2,200 nurses. And we did that over 3 months. The nurses were trying this game or this assessment actually in their own home after work and not during work. All right? A lot of lessons we learned along the way. Number one, we actually figure out that the nurses actually don't learn it on the go. They will actually learn it at home. We at first thought that they will learn it inside the train when they're going home and all this kind of stuff. Actually, it doesn't. So it doesn't work very well on mobile phones. Tablet, yes. iPad, yes. But not on mobile phone because it's way too small. And in medical side, it's actually very dangerous because a lot of things are actually very detailed. So we actually didn't go in the direction of mobile devices, although the games are all playable on mobile devices. The game is just a Unity game. It's built on Unity. And then after that, we link it to the learning management system, and they were able to play that. Now, the data we received was tremendous, as I said earlier. But what is more interesting is this: we built the entire scenario based on the exact scenario inside the hospital. And the bonus that we got out of this is not that we are just assessing them. So when it comes to assessment, we were looking at, how much time they play, what is the expectation, and so on and so forth. But the most interesting thing is this: because they were so familiar inside the room, they know exactly where to go to take the exact equipment from the exact drawer or the shelf, because they are that familiar with the place. We took advantage of that. We introduced a game that is slightly different but exactly looking like that, but we removed the cupboard. Once you remove one item inside the room, you will start to see amazing thing happen. The nurse will start finding that, hey, what happened to the cupboard? It is not there. So where is that particular syringe, or where is that particular equipment that I need? Then they start exploring the rest of the rooms. Okay, then that is where we start to infer and start to understand workflow inside a specific ward. Would that change behavior in the real environment? That is what we started to study. And we realized that it will. Sometimes by changing certain pieces of furniture inside a room, it makes the entire process a lot more efficient. And there is also the chances of human error. This one I won't go into very much detail, but there was a case when the equipment was placed in certain places and the nurse was always going to the same place to get it, but it was placed very close to another item that looks exactly the same, except the labeling is different. The nurse took the wrong item and injected the patient with the wrong medication. So by sometimes changing certain things like this, we start to understand the workflow inside the hospital, and then we can start making changes. These were some of the things that we were learning in terms of workflow for the management. But for the nurses, we also started to learn new things about the nurses. How they cheat. 2,000 of the nurses have to pass this test so that they can become, retain their points and their license to practice as a nurse. So they started to cheat because they are supposed to play at home. For those who didn't pass, on one particular weekend, they start to have a house party, and they get all their other fellow nurses who passed to come and have a party at their house, and then they start taking the test, and then they have a group of nurses behind them. We started to realize all this when we started asking more and more deeper questions, and it's very interesting because the questions that we ask is just like a lot of this post survey that you do, and then you ask, is the game interesting? These are superficial questions. When somebody tells you the game is boring, the game is very boring, or the game is boring, it is very hard to tell what exactly do they mean. Because a game is boring to a 30-year-old or to a 20-year-old could mean that the game graphics is very boring, or the game mechanics is very boring. But to a 60-year-old or a 50-year-old nurse, the game is not boring. It's just that I can't get to pass. To somebody who has never been trying to do blood transfusion, and that it is a difficulty for them. Or for somebody who is not familiar with the procedure, because what they have been doing in the hospital is slightly different from the procedure. Procedures tends to be a little bit more stricter, so that they have to follow that procedure. So sometimes we have to go deeper into trying to understand when somebody says the game is boring. So the nurses actually, the nurses involved with the project actually have to go in and ask very deep questions about, what do you mean when you say the game is very boring? So a lot of this we actually learned from when we were developing the game as an assessment tool. Then what the hospital wanted us to do is, how do you bring the cost of developing such a game down? Very simple question, right? How do you bring it down? Interestingly, when we developed this blood transfusion game, I actually didn't do it with a Singapore company. I did it with an Italian company. It's not cheap, right? How do we bring the entire cost down? So we started to think about something a little bit out of the box, in the sense that, look, game developers are fantastic, but can you build the first scenario and then I get my clinicians to build the subsequent scenarios? Is there that possibility? Right? Think about it. A game cannot be complete until you have the multiple levels, the multiple scenarios that you have. One scenario will not be able to cut it as a game. So we needed multiple scenarios. So what we are starting to do now in Singapore is that we are getting game developers in and we pay them to make the first layer of the game. Then I also negotiated in such a way that all games in Singapore, the IP right of that game belongs to the subject matter expert. It doesn't belong to the game developer. Why? Because game developer actually gets your money for developing the game. Then after that, the hospital would like to continue with the project, so they want to have IP rights to the game. They are not out there to make tons of money, but they need to have access to the game so they can continuously build more and more scenarios. So what we did is that we then started to look at game authoring tools. Can we get our clinicians to learn how to use the game authoring tools if the first scenario was already built by the game developer? That is currently what we are doing now. We are training many of our clinicians, our nurses and our doctors, and our IT people in the hospital on developing the multiple scenarios within the game. All right? Because at the end of the day, they are the storytellers, not the game developers, because the scenarios and all the points that you are trying to build is actually coming out from the clinicians, if you think about it, right? So what we did is that for the blood transfusion game, we built the first scenario, and then we get all the clinicians to start building the different scenarios, and then the game developer comes in to help them, guide them to think about how do you do leveling and how do you do the different scenarios and make them into a complete set of games. And then the dashboard people come in and tell them, basically we embedded and we started collecting the data backend for them. So that is how we were doing it to cut down the cost. Secondly, we started building a library of assets for the healthcare system. All the assets goes into this library. Whoever wants to participate in this ecosystem will have to participate in this public library of assets, which we are working with Unity. All right? So all the assets that you develop in your different games will go into this same library, and whoever has access into this library can use the assets for free. That will actually cut down a lot of our costs on 3D assets that we are building in the healthcare sector. So that was how we are moving forward and looking at how we can cut down the cost of actually building games in the healthcare sector. Then the next thing we are trying to do now is that once we have developed the games, we are now going around to other hospitals and sharing a different model. We adopted the concept of publishing. If every game was developed by different hospital, owned by different hospital, can they not be the author themselves? Whereas there will be a central publisher who will put all the games together into a whole portfolio of topics. And when we go to the hospital, we are actually showing the whole portfolio of topics, and that is currently what SingHealth, the government hospital in Singapore, is trying to build. Success or not, we don't know yet. So we are trying that at this point of time. But those were the strategies that we were trying to do so that we can prove to the government that at the end of the day, there is a possibility of gaining revenue from the games that we are building to sustain the maintenance and the operations and expanding the different scenarios in the games. And then these are the figures that came out of recent reports, how big is the market and so on and so forth. Very interesting numbers. I wonder how much is actually from the profit. So anyway, this is something that we looked at. We think there's a potential, but I think there's something that is still missing in the system. And this is something that we wanted to talk about later in this afternoon. In Singapore, we realized that you can produce a game, but it is very hard to sell the game even if you help them compile all the games together. There is still one missing factor, which is accreditation of serious games. Okay? And we are talking about healthcare games, games that can directly impact on patient safety. These are very important to the doctors. Now, you produce something, how do we know it's accurate? How do we know that somebody has actually tested it? So what we are actually trying to advocate in Singapore is that once the games are being developed, the universities actually are already attached with us, where the students from the universities are working directly, very closely with the clinicians to do validation of the games. But this is still something that we realize that it cannot be a Singapore effort. It has to be an effort that is with different countries. And that's the reason why I think I was working with the Dutch Society of Simulation Healthcare. We are also talking to the British, the UK group of game developers, researchers. And we are also talking to a lot of the ecosystem that are developing games in Australia, in US, and we are trying to develop something of a common framework. There must be a common validation framework that is robust enough that every country should be using and adopting so that we can say, look, once it is being adopted, this is a good set of game that actually covers precise content. In terms of content, there is pedagogy that is involved. There is also the technology that's involved. That means the user experience, the robustness of the technology, and so on and so forth. All of this has to be covered. And this is something that we are trying to see whether our partners all over the world can actually help establish a common framework. Now, if you have a common validation framework, then we can go on to say, can we then not give accreditation to such games? Just like your entertainment games. That's what we are saying. You know, for entertainment games, you got your AAA. Why can't we do that for serious games? We should be able to give accreditation because when you produce a game and you say it's precise and you have gone through validation, even the very word that you say, I have gone through validation, 100 user tests and a 5,000 user test is very different, right? So that's why we are saying even for accreditation, we are trying to make that difference, all right? So this is something that we are looking at right now in Singapore, and we are looking for partners that we are working with. In UK, we are already starting our conversation with Imperial College. In US, we are talking to MIT. So we are trying to figure out validation framework for this. Precisely, this is what we were hoping to do. Getting from scientific validation and from expert accreditation, it goes into a game depository, and then from the game depository, it goes out into the marketplace. Very simple. Simple, but not that simple. So it's a very long process that we have already started on the journey. But the interesting thing is that the government hospitals in Singapore are actually backing this up. Almost to the end, serious game promotion. If you think about it, actually, when the government asked me, "Are you confident of selling the game?" I was very confident to them that I can sell their game when they are made into a full set of games and they are involved in the validation and accreditation process. Why? Because the selling is not done by me. The interesting thing is that the selling will actually be done by the hospitals themselves because their nurses are using it, because they are the first customer. They themselves 2,000, 3,000, or even 7,000 people using the game. They are going out and selling the games for us. Already, the blood transfusion game with one silly scenario, it was already presented at WHO's conferences, meetings. I already have paid orders from Vietnam, Laos, and China. These are orders that is asking us to create more of the games and then asking us how they can actually then localize it after we have validated it. So a lot of this selling is actually done by the community themselves and is actually not done by us. So we are the commercial part when we have to put this together, all right? So this is the last part of my sharing session. Again, I got too much time. So I decided that we wanted to do this simulation game challenge. And we have actually practiced it. We conducted it once this year. And it's very interesting. I started with this time, I'm not so daring. I decided I shouldn't have 132 teams participating. So we started only with 15 teams. And then we narrowed them down to 6. But this is the interesting thing. We are now going out to clinical teams and saying that from any of your specific profession, you think about how you can use game technology to develop the game, and we will teach you how to use the game authoring tool. Okay, we will also match you with the game developer to help you make the game for free. Then we want to see how the outcome of the entire project will be. So we'll be continuing on this, but the interesting thing is that we already have South Korea hospitals participating in this. We also have the Malaysian hospitals coming in, and also the Chinese hospitals coming in. So we want to now start to see and compare what would be the difference from the different hospitals and from the different game developers in those countries supporting those hospitals. So that will be something interesting for us, and the kind of topic they'll be able to cover. Okay, so if you are interested, let me know. I'm more than happy to have you guys come on board. But it has to, you have to have the clinical team that is involved and not the developers, because in this case, our emphasis is more on the clinical team. Last but not least, this is the conference that we'll be hosting next year together with the hospital, the REACH Games Conference. I call it REACH because it's too mouthful. Research, Innovation, and Commercialization in Healthcare. This is actually games, research, innovation, commercialization in healthcare. It is jointly organized with the hospital, which means that the hospitals are actually driving it. Because of this particular conference, well, in any place you will realize that hospitals are actually fighting with each other for resources. For the first time, the entire hospital system in Singapore is coming together to actually drive this entire conference, because every one of them realize that they cannot be fighting with each other. We are all supposed to work together and see how we can further the game technology, whether it is in AR, VR, or artificial intelligence or machine learning. All right. So a lot of the clinical teams are actually stepping forward and saying that if you have something you develop in that area, I will step away, I will develop in something else. So we have hospitals who focus on population health. We have hospitals who are focusing on palliative care. Using games for palliative care, you'll be surprised. A lot of our doctors are starting to see patients as numbers and not as patients. So we have to now re-educate our doctors and saying that, look, they are human beings. How would you break a message down? Like, for example, I'm sorry, you have 4 months left to go. It's a very hard truth. The way our doctors are saying it is that you have 4 months to go. Please go and see that nurse over there and see what you have to make your payment and so on and so forth. That is very cold. So we are now starting to look at it and say, how do we train our doctors, taking it from a different approach? So these are the things that we are actually using game avatars to actually teach a lot of our medical doctors. So this will be the conference that we will be actually using to share all these different case studies. All right.